What's going on, everybody? Michael here. I hope you're all doing well. It's been a little while since I've put a new video out there, and this one's going to be a little bit different. It's not intended to be a deep dive tutorial like I've focused on to date, but I really wanted to talk about, I was just in Colorado at the end of July and early on into August, and I wanted to talk about that experience a little bit and a little bit of what I've struggled with since getting back, and then tie that into also how I come back from a trip like this with, potentially several hundred image files and start paring those files down so that I make a determination of what are the ones that I'm happy with that I really want to dig into and start processing within Lightroom Classic. This video is not intended to be a Lightroom specific tutorial. I'm going to be using Lightroom, but ideally is you can take some of the practices that I've implemented within Lightroom and carry them over to whatever program you're using or your own file management and things like that. In addition to talking about how I pare down my images or cull my images when I get back from a trip like this, I also wanted to dive into a little bit how I manage my files just in a broader sense and how I protect my files from potential data loss when I get back from a trip. I continue to see on social media, Reddit, even feedback to me via my YouTube channel or other social media, people requesting some more information on how to manage files in Lightroom and things like that. And this isn't intended to be that deep dive tutorial or walkthrough or anything, but I did want to touch on it, and I've touched on it a little bit already in my importing the Lightroom Classic tutorial video, so if you haven't watched that, you can get some pointers from that one as well. But I do want to talk to it a little bit. So when I come back from a trip, and really even throughout the trip, as I go out and shoot and come back to my home base, whether that's campsite, hotel, Airbnb, whatever, I try to download off my SD card from the camera as frequently as possible so that I'm keeping my data protected. The reality is I'm shooting with a Canon EOS R. The downside of that is, heaven forbid, it doesn't have a dual card slot. I don't think it's that big of a deal, but it does introduce a little bit of risk because I don't have the opportunity to write to two cards internally in the camera right off the get-go. But what I do to mitigate that risk is when I get back, and in this case, I didn't download throughout the trip, but when I got back home to Texas, first thing I did is pop the memory card into my laptop and import all those files into Lightroom. I always import to two locations simultaneously. And again, I cover this in that import tutorial, but I import to my internal drive on the laptop as well as to my external drive. My external SSD drive is my primary storage location for all of my raw files. I keep that backed up via third-party service BACKBLAZE. I also keep an off-site copy of that drive at my corporate office, which is a little ironic because I haven't actually been there in 5 months to do anything with that. The point of it is I'm backing up immediately to two locations, and then after I've imported everything, I don't do anything with the files on the SD card. I don't drop it right back into my camera and start using it. Certainly don't format it. That's kind of my first step of backing everything up and having the data in multiple locations. So I've got it on my internal laptop drive. I've got it on my external SSD drive, which is where they'll be permanently housed. And then I keep all the files on my SD card as well. And I do this whether I'm downloading and importing multiple times throughout a trip while I'm still in the field, or if I do what I did with this Colorado trip and just don't deal with it until I get back home. The reason I don't do that is I'm giving OneDrive on my laptop a chance to sync all of those internal copies back up to my OneDrive cloud storage. I'm also giving BACKBLAZE, my third-party backup service, a chance to back up everything from that internal drive as well as from my external SSD drive up into its cloud so that I'm protected in case hard drive crashes, house burns down, whatever the tragedy might be, I'm covered and I'm not going to lose anything. And one of the big key points to remember here is just the act of importing into Lightroom Classic. And we're talking about Classic here specifically, but importing into your catalog is not backing up your files. If you've got your files stored in a single folder in a single location, let's say on your internal drive of your laptop, importing them into Lightroom is not backing them up. All Lightroom is doing is referencing that file location. If you move those files outside of Lightroom, Lightroom is going to lose them. You'll have to reconnect it or relink the Lightroom catalog to that new location that you've moved them to. Even if you're building previews, that's still not a backup. Maybe you could argue if you're doing one-to-one previews, but it's still not going to be your raw files with all the raw data, and it's certainly not going to be a good backup source if you do have a catastrophic event and lose everything that's out there. Also, in terms of Lightroom Classic for me, I don't use the new version of Lightroom that syncs everything, including your raw files, to the cloud. So from a Lightroom cloud standpoint or an Adobe Creative Cloud standpoint, the only versions of my images that are synced up to the cloud are smart previews. They're okay quality, but again, they are not going to be sufficient to really be a true backup for you. So lesson number one here is I've got 2 or 3 people that I'm friends with that I know personally that have lost everything because they didn't have any type of backup solution. At the very least, make sure you're importing to a couple different locations, or if you're using an external drive, copy it to another external drive and keep that off-site. Copy your internal to an external and take that off-site. Something so you've got some type of backup protecting you. It is a horrible feeling to hear from somebody or see even a stranger on social media put a plea out for help saying, I dropped my hard drive, I lost my hard drive, whatever the case may be, it just failed and it's unrecoverable. Even if it's recoverable, you could be looking at multiple thousands of dollars to get that data back off of a damaged or a faulty drive. So it's a lot cheaper, it's a lot simpler, it's a lot quicker if you go through a true proper backup process. I mentioned I use a third-party service as well with BACKBLAZE. I used to use CrashPlan. Personally, I prefer BACKBLAZE. It's personal choice. It's $60 a year, unlimited storage. The advantage with a true backup cloud service like that is you're getting versioning. So let's say I got a virus or some type of corruption on my drive. The last thing you want to be doing is just relying on something like OneDrive or Google Photos or Amazon storage, and now you've just created a cloud version of that corrupted file or your virus infected files or whatever the case may be. You don't necessarily have that versioning history. I have an extra added layer. I use Microsoft 365, so I've got their premium features of the OneDrive service, so I do have some versioning history. I can go back 30 days. BACKBLAZE, I just actually started paying an extra couple bucks a month, I want to say, so that I've got a longer backlog or a longer archive of version history as well. That way, if my most recent backup is corrupt or damaged in some way, faulty in some way, I can go back to a later point in time and grab that. So again, it's just layer upon layer of protecting yourself and making sure, A, your files aren't just in one place that's at risk. They're in multiple places, and ideally you're also backed up with one of these cloud services. What really is protecting me is that BACKBLAZE service, and I'll link it in the description for this as well. Anyways, let's jump in here. I want to show you the next thing I want to talk about. That's kind of just an aside, is coming back from Colorado. I'm always in a little bit of a funk after one of these trips. I think it's just the reality of coming back to the real world and going back to my corporate job, dealing with house maintenance. I've got a new roof getting installed, just all those worries that you kind of escape from. And for me, photography is very much my mental therapy and escape. And coming back, I always struggle a little bit. I'm always a little bit down and maybe a little cranky, as I'm sure my girlfriend will be quick to agree with. This trip especially, it was a good week and a half that I was just in a really, really heavy funk. This is the first outing I've had since the pandemic. So for me, this is the first time I've done anything really, truly photography centric in terms of a trip, certainly since I was in Yosemite for the Out of Chicago conference back in February. So there was a little bit of mental rustiness I had to get over being in Colorado the first couple days, and then coming back, I think it was just the usual, return to reality, plus the return of realizing that there's still politics and there's still a pandemic and just all of that. So anyways, part of my additional funk was, here I am coming back and I had 400, almost 450 files to go through, which is a little bit more for me. Not only was the Colorado trip challenging because it was the first time I've really gone out and shot in basically 6 months, but also the conditions were just not great. I went into it worried that I was going to get nothing but perfectly clear skies, no dramatic light or anything. Well, I didn't have dramatic light, but it wasn't because of clear skies. It was the complete opposite. It rained every single day for the first 6 or 7 days I was in Colorado. And really at the ideal times is when we had the worst weather. Early morning light, late evening light, there really wasn't any except for one evening when I decided to settle down early, and of course the sky just lit on fire. Otherwise, it was rainy, extremely overcast. It was a challenging shooting environment that put me in the position of going out and exploring. I haven't been in Colorado a whole lot, going in with no expectations other than expecting it to be sunny, and exploring and looking up on the map and seeing where I wanted to go today. It was my first opportunity with the 4Runner since I got it to use it for what I bought it for, which is a photography trip and going out on some rougher Forest Service roads and things like that. That all was great, but it put me in the position of not being familiar with the area really at all, and also having to either chase conditions or run from conditions. There was one day where I spent like 2 hours just trying to stay ahead of heavy rain that was coming in. So it put me in a position of where I've really shifted over the last year and a half, 2 years, to more slow-paced, contemplative photography and taking fewer shots, to where I was in conditions that were fleeting, and maybe I only had 30 to 60 seconds of good light or interesting clouds or heavy rain right across the field from me, and I had to get some shots in and then go. I got into a little bit more run and gun. I wasn't always using the tripod and really focusing on taking 5-10 minutes to look for the best composition. A lot of it was pulling over, stopping, taking the shot that I saw, and moving on. So I came back with a lot more shots, and that was adding to this funk of, oh my gosh, I've got so many more shots than what I've been used to dealing with now. How do I find the motivation to start digging into those? All it is a really long-winded way of saying, I want to show you how I come back from a trip like this and start culling my images. You know, coming in, I've already got everything imported, and again, if you want any tips, tricks, recommendations, best practices, or how-tos, I've got that importing the Lightroom Classic tutorial that you can check out. So that's all done. But what I've got here now is I've got 449 files that I need to start going through and determining which of these am I even interested in working on. I'm not going to edit all 449. You know, a lot of these are going to be throwaways. So for me, what I do is I use a combination of ratings and color labels in Lightroom to help me start culling through and organizing these images right off the get-go. I've already done all that, and the how-to is pretty easy, so I really don't want to dig into that. If you've got questions, feel free to ask in the comments below and I'll get back to you. But what I do is I go through all of my images, and first thing I do is I find anything I see any kind of potential in and I rate it 1 star. Anything that's a clear throwaway, I go ahead and use the reject flag. And just a quick press of the X key on my keyboard and I've rejected that image. Going forward, I don't need to bother looking at it. Back when I first started out, I would come in and I was using just the flag for indicating any image that I thought had potential. So I'd still end up with dozens, if not over 100 images flagged. And then I'd go through those and determine, well, I want to edit that one. And then I'd work on an image and I would come back and say, okay, well, I've still got this 100+ group of images. Now I need to go through them again and find my best one. And I just had everything flagged. I didn't winnow it down, so to speak. So that's where the rating system has really worked well for me. I go through, identify what are my clear rejects, and I determine what are the ones that have any level of potential in terms of how I might process them and turn them into something I feel is worthy of sharing or adding to my portfolio, offering for prints or what have you. So once I get it pared down to that, then I would come in. I think you've got default filters in Lightroom for 1 star, 2 star, 3 star. I've also got some others created for 1 and above, 2 and above, 3 and above. But I would come in and I would say, okay, well, here's all of my files that I've identified as my 1 stars. They've got potential. Maybe not as much potential as some other images in the group, but here's the 1 star group that I can start going through. And then I'm just comparing. Is this one better than that one? Do I like that better than this? Which do I think has a better potential from a processing standpoint? With this particular trip, I'm doing a lot of black and white work. I might actually do my entire series in black and white, which is unusual for me. So I'm looking at it from that viewpoint as well, is if I've got 2 images and I'm comparing in terms of determining what do I want to work on, and I'm leaning towards sticking with that black and white theme, well, this one's pretty good, but I don't think it's going to work for black and white composition or edit. So I'm going to go with this one. And then I go through all my 1 stars and I start determining which are my 2 stars. Still may not be my final selection, but it's helping me pare that down to get to a smaller group that I can really hone in on as I process. So once I go through and I determine my 2 stars, if I filter for just my 2 star images, so we've gone from 300 and something down to now I'm at 13 images. Now this was actually larger. I think I was at about 50 images I determined were 2 stars. And the reason that we're only seeing so many here is I've already gone to the next step, which is determining my 3 stars, but it's the same process. It just repeats. I take all of my 2 stars, whether it's 50, 40, however many, and I'm just comparing them. Do I like this one better than that one? Which one of these do I see the most potential in? And I'll start flagging things as a 3 star. I don't go any higher than 3 star typically because I find that helps me pare it down enough, but you could go all the way up to a 5 star process. This is just an example of what I'm doing to help you get some ideas. And then the last step here would be to see what are my 3 stars. So at the end of the day, it's gotten me down from 449 images down to 22 compositions or images that I can work with. And I say compositions because I've actually got more files in here. And this is the next step I'll show you. But on this trip, I did some focus stack shots. So I took a shot that's in focus up close, kind of middle, and then far. I need to blend those together in Photoshop. So I've really got more images than just the 22 flagged as 3 star, but I've got them stacked within Lightroom. As an example of that, if we look at this second one here, so you can see on this particular frame, the rock is nice and sharp and in focus, but I've got this little indicator here telling me I've got some images stacked. So if I click on that 2, Now I can see I've got these two images that are stacked together. And from a Lightroom standpoint, stacking isn't like Photoshop stacking. It's just stacking them in a group. Think of playing cards. You're just creating a stack of playing cards that are all related in some manner. So for me, I come in and I stack. When I've taken multiple shots for focus stacking, I'll group those into a stack. I also use color labels to help me identify my images that are not individual one-off images, but they are grouped together for some reason. So for me, blue indicates it is a focus stack. That makes sense. A group of images to be focus stacked. So I've got both of these labeled blue. They're both 3 stars, but now when I click back and forth, and it's fairly subtle on here, this first image, the rock is perfectly sharp and in focus. The second image, I focused more on the foliage right next to the rock, so it's focused. So I know these two images go together. They're labeled blue. So I know they're a focus stack group, and they're stacked up just to keep me a little bit more organized. So I also took the opportunity, we finally had clear skies the last night. I wanted to get an opportunity to try to capture Comet Neowise. So I took multiple shots with the intent of stacking them in either Photoshop or Sequator to reduce noise and bring out more detail in the comet. So in this case, it's not a focus stack, it's a noise reduction stack. So I've got these grouped together. I took 15 shots total. If I expand these out, you can see they're all labeled with the color purple label, which is telling me they're for noise reduction stacking. They're all still rated 3 because I want them all together in my final pared down group of images for consideration for processing. But now I know that these I need to take into a third program or an external program and stack them together to reduce the noise. So that's all there is to it. So relatively quickly, I mean, it took me an hour or two, but I went from that 449 kind of overwhelming, daunting number of images that I've got, and I've whittled it down to these 22 compositions that now I can come in here real quickly, apply my filter to look at just my 3-star files, and I know these are the ones I want to start working on and see what I can do with them in terms of post-processing. So I feel like I blew through this kind of quickly, but hopefully it all made sense. Again, I'm watching the comments. If you do have questions, I'm happy to answer them. I can throw another video up that takes a deeper dive if it seems like it's needed. But at the end of the day, this is how I keep myself organized and on track. When I come back from a trip like this, and I've got all these files and I want to start working on them, but I need to be organized first. Because otherwise you're spending so much time going back through all your hundreds of shots to find that one that you saw before that you kind of liked and you want to work on, but there was something else you wanted to work on first. This makes it a heck of a lot easier than going back through the entire list of files every single time you come back in. With that, I'm going to wrap this up. As always, if you do have questions, I've already said it a million times in this video, but don't hesitate to drop a question in the comments or send me a private message on social media or whatever. I promise you I will get back to all of you as quickly as I can. Otherwise, if you've enjoyed this, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please take a moment to do that as well. Turn on the alert notifications so you know when I continue to release more videos in the future. And as always, if you have ideas or questions and videos you'd like to see me put out in the future, please let me know that as well. I'm really trying to base this off of community feedback, so I'm always listening and looking for ideas like that. Otherwise, I hope you're all doing well in this crazy year, this crazy summer, and everybody's staying safe and healthy, and I will talk to you next time. Take care, everybody.